What up, Cucks? It's your boy, the hater, up in this piece. And today, I'm going to start part one of a three-part series that talks about the aforementioned 3 reasons why wrestling is interesting, and which are also, obviously, the 3 elements that are required for wrestling to be successful, right? The first of these is the in-ring work, by far the least relevant, but we're going to talk about that too, so that our series is complete. Now, before we get to it, let's get on with a few little statements. Let it be understood that when I say in-ring work, I'm talking about the matches as well as anything else that happens in the ring, like promos, entrance, after the match, what happens, right? Anything like that that would be presented to the audience as part of the show is going to be the in-ring work. This might also include backstage promos, right? This is to be compared to other things like charisma, the importance of wrestling characters, etc., etc. I've already talked about the 3 pillars, so let's talk about the first one, in-ring work. Now, obviously, the most salient part of in-ring work in wrestling is going to be the matches, right? The vast majority of the time, especially nowadays, that is dedicated to in-ring segments involves matches, right? Which I'm going to include entrances and things like that, right? Now, in matches, wrestlers have to differentiate themselves. This is done through a number of ways. Obviously, the most important ways are gimmicks and character work and presentation and things like that. But another way that is very important and that people have gotten completely wrong is the moveset and their in-ring ability. Now, let's not get it twisted. When I say in-ring ability, I'm talking about 2 things. Number 1, the ability of a wrestler to do the moves, which is a very, very low bar. Even like Ronda Rousey and Bad Bunny, like even Bad Bunny can do the moves. Like that's not the hard part. But the important part is the move selection, right? And why the move selection is important. It's important because it informs the 2 other pillars. But since we're talking about in-ring work, let's focus on that, right? Wrestling moves fall into a variety of categories. We have boring rest holds and other boring moves like a vertical suplex or a kick to the head or anything like that, right? Then we've got exciting wrestling moves, which typically are framed as either signature moves or finishers of various specific wrestlers. And then in the middle of that somewhere, we have the overall concept of the moveset. So for example, Rey Mysterio, his finishing move is the 619 and then a follow-up high-risk move like a springboard something, or perhaps a frog splash at this juncture of his career. Now, with that being said, the rest of Rey Mysterio's moveset is commensurate with who he is as a wrestler, right? So Rey Mysterio does not go around doing vertical suplexes, right? Because number 1, he can't pull it off. And number 2, even if he could pull it off, and some of the wrestlers, like, he could probably vertically suplex Seth Rollins, right? Especially if Seth Rollins helps. But it just doesn't fit his character, right? In other words, the moveset of the wrestler, along with the signature moves in the finisher, must correspond to the wrestler in question. This is why Mark Henry doesn't do moonsaults, and this is why Jeff Hardy doesn't do the World's Strongest Slam, which he actually does. That's actually quite ironic. For the 2 examples that I use is that, but Jeff Hardy does this little fall away, fall forward slam thing that he does. But nevertheless, obviously, Jeff Hardy does not do power moves, right? He knows what he's good at, and he sticks to his horse shit. Same thing with Mark Henry, who also sticks to his horse shit. Now, that being said, what makes a wrestler exciting? In my opinion, it's not even the moves that the person does, right? It certainly is not the amount of moves, because there you have Goldberg, who does like 2 or 3 moves. I mean, he actually does more, but he does like 2 or 3 main moves, and he's still entertaining, right? Why? Because his moves fit his character, right? A Goldberg match would not be better if Goldberg, at some point before he does the jackhammer, also did a German suplex, right? It would not make the match better, because there's no point in the German suplex. It adds nothing. Now, with all that in mind, people have this tendency to treat the in-ring element, the wrestling match, if you will, as a real sport, in the fact that they compare it to a real sport by saying that this person's better than that person, right? Now, you'll have a lot of trouble convincing these nerds that someone like Dean Malenko didn't do anything impressive because he, according to them, put on impressive matches. Now, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that Dean Malenko could execute a lot of moves, right? But it remains unseen whether or not Dean Malenko can execute more moves than Cena. Their wrestling style is different. Considering that Dean Malenko adds nothing else to the sport, quote unquote, of wrestling, except for his moves, of course, he's going to do these weird hold-like moves, right? Same thing with Daniel Bryan. He doesn't really add anything until recently when he started the Yes movement, and that did get over, right? But before that, he was just a guy who wrestles. And while that in itself can be a good gimmick, right? That should be a gimmick. There should be a guy like Timothy Thatcher or, Daniel Bryan or William Regal's son, whatever his name is, whose gimmick is, I just wrestle, right? And the gimmick should be probably a comedy gimmick, suggesting that this person offers nothing more, right? Like a Lance Storm, right? Like an overly serious gimmick that corresponds to the fact that this guy can do a lot of amazing moves, but that's really all he brings to the table, right? Lance Storm will never be as over as Stone Cold, who did like 3 moves, and where all 3 moves, except for the stunner, are just boring moves, right? Like the Luthes press is boring. The move where he goes off the ropes and like does the middle finger and then drops the forearm is boring, right? The little spine buster he does, boring. The hot shot, boring. These are all boring moves, but it doesn't matter because he doesn't get over on the moveset. So as we've just established, the moveset is clearly the third of our 3 pillars. But nevertheless, let's analyze a few wrestlers where the moveset makes sense. Let's go with Kane, right? Kane is a great example because Kane is your typical big man in many ways, right? His finishing move is a choke slam. He does the sidewalk slam. He'll sometimes lift someone up with both hands and choke him and drop him. He'll do clotheslines, big boots, and he has one move that he pulls out of nowhere, which is that Inzaguri used to do, which was pretty cool because it's a big guy doing a small guy move, and the flying clothesline, right? But aside from those 2 moves, Kane is just a stereotypical big man with a big man finish. But that's all he needs, right? It is unclear whether or not John Cena can do a better step-toe hold than Dean Malenko, because John Cena doesn't do the step-toe hold that often, right? And if he does, he's doing it on really, really big, awkward wrestlers, right? Otherwise, he'll just manhandle the person and put the STFU on him, right? So he'll do the step-toe hold on like Great Khali, where it's a little bit unrealistic, but whatever, it is what it is, right? Dean Malenko and these, overall great technical wrestlers, right? Like Jericho and Benoit and Angle, right? These guys, the fact that they can do great wrestling moves is immaterial. The real thing that makes them interesting is their gimmick, right? Except for Benoit, and let's be real, Benoit was not interesting. He was boring. That's why he was a jobber for the vast majority of his career. But because he actually looked like he can kick someone's ass, they eventually elevated him to an upper mid-carder where he belonged, really. He never should have main evented WrestleMania. It is what it is. It was a great moment, don't get me wrong, but he shouldn't have done it, right? The point is, these wrestling moves, for people like Benoit, for people like Guerrero, for people like Jericho even, right? They fit the character well. The problem is, right, that you need to also have some sort of unique individuality, right? So for example, when Benoit came around, nobody was doing the diving headbutt, nobody was doing the cripple crossface, and nobody was doing 3 Germans in a row. So those became his signature moves. That's what he was known for, right? So if you like those moves, you might enjoy a Benoit match. If you like the Canadian Destroyer, you'd have to switch over to TNA and watch Petey Williams. Now, the problem is, when everyone does every move, the move gets diluted, right? And the bigger problem is when you have a wrestler like, I don't know, Gunther, for example, who has no innovative moves, right? All his moves are moves that other people do for free, right? A power bomb, a splash, these are things that everybody does. So the problem is, if there is no actual move associated with this character, and in my opinion, the move should also be associated with the gimmick. So we have, for example, a scenario where Kane came back with his mask, and he attacked Cena, and he had a new move called Attempted Murder, which is basically like a claw hold, and the implications were he just chokes the person's face with just his vicious hand, right? Like crushing their face and maybe preventing them from breathing, right? He suffocates them. That's what Michael Cole would say, right? This was a move that was necessary to put over the new masked Kane, which was like supposed to be Prime Kane again, right? Prime Kane is back to deal with Cena and do his super move now. You understand what I'm saying? Same thing with Edge when he came back and he had the anti-venom, right? Which was specific to his match against Randy Orton. Randy Orton's the Viper. Vipers are poisonous. The anti-venom is his answer to Randy Orton, right? Which was basically like a triangle choke, right, with his arms, like an arm triangle, not an arm triangle, but like a almost like a Von Flue choke. But anyways, the point is, this is what wrestling moves are about. Wrestlers, when they get new gimmicks or when they come back after a long time, in my opinion, should be expected to have new moves, right? Or at the very least, like let's say you have AJ Styles, right? AJ Styles, nobody does the Styles Clash in WWE, right? Except for Michelle McCool, but she hasn't been around in a long time, and she stole from AJ Styles, right? So he can come in and do the Styles Clash perfectly fine, right? Because it's a unique move that belongs only to him. This differentiates AJ Styles from, let's say, Matt Riddle, right? Knowing which move is this guy's finisher gives you information on when the match is supposed to end, and then gives you information on when a false finish is relevant. So let's take AJ Styles. He does the Styles Clash, someone kicks out almost at 3. It's like, oh my God, how do they kick out of the Styles Clash? If you compare that to a Gunther match, someone kicks out of a chop. It's like, well, he's done 50 chops in this match, but sometimes someone doesn't kick out of the last chop. Oh, interesting. Power bombs. Wrestlers do power bombs all the time, and it always gets a 2 count. When Gunther does it, sometimes he gets a 2 count, sometimes it doesn't. How are we supposed to know when this regular move is being used as a finisher or not? So, I posit the following. The real question, the real impact of doing the correct wrestling move comes down to one of the other pillars, which corresponds to the presentation of a character, right? If Gunther does not present the move correctly, using him as an example only, right? Then how am I supposed to know it's a finisher? The same problem could be said with Karrion Kross before he has his new finisher, which actually looks like a finisher, right? Karrion Kross's finisher was a choke, a forearm to the back of the neck, and a Saito suplex. You can call it a Doomsday Saito suplex all you want. It's a backdrop, cucks. It's a backdrop. So it's like, how am I supposed to know which matches are worthwhile to end with this move and which matches aren't, right? In addition, and I'll say this last, the finishing move and the name of the finishing move should have some connection to the wrestler we're dealing with, right? The AA, which was called the FU before, was called the FU because of John Cena's FU attitude, right? It made sense. The 619 is where Rey Mysterio comes from. So, okay, right? When Io Shirai does it, you can call it a 619, but at that point, it's just an homage to Rey Mysterio, right? Rey Mysterio invented the move. He's the guy who actually does it, you know, as a finisher, right? Oh, Tiger Mask invented it. I know, I don't care. You know what I'm talking about, right? Likewise, some wrestlers have moves where the move doesn't have a name, right? So, for example, Randy Orton does the cutter, or the jumping cutter, and it's called the RKO. But other wrestlers just do a move, and it's just the name of the move. Sometimes this works when the wrestler is good at other things, right? So, for example, Eddie Guerrero just did the frog splash, right? But it didn't matter because you're not there to see the frog splash, which is like a mildly athletic move. You're there because he's Latino heat. You know what I'm saying? You're there for other reasons, right? You're watching the match for other reasons. You're not watching it so you can do the great move at the end of the match, right? Wrestling moves need to be associated with wrestlers. And in my opinion, when a wrestler doesn't have a true finisher, that's a problem, right? You come off looking as a mid-carder. And that's the importance of wrestling moves, cucks.